Before we start, drop 2 quick answers in the comments so we know who is in the room. What city are you watching from, and what time is it there right now? Keep your clock in mind because this story turns on minutes, timetables, and the sound a person makes when she thinks no one else will ever hear her. A pawnbroker in a rail town on the Great Lakes swore he never listened to other people's property. He broke that rule the night a young man slid a nickel-plated phonograph across the counter with a sealed tin of wax cylinders marked "Bridal Oaths. Do not play." The seal was already cracked. The broker turned the handle, set the reproducer, and dropped the needle. What came through the brass horn was not music. It was a woman's voice saying her full name, the date, and the words, "I swear to keep my body, my time, and my letters pure, and to never touch or be touched in secret." She whispered a man's first name. The broker stopped the machine, resealed the tin with cheap red wax, and sent for the federal inspector whose name freight agents muttered when a shipment went missing. Her name was May Donovan. If you have never heard of a bridal oath cylinder, you are not alone. Between 1906 and 1915, a traveling school of propriety and elocution moved up and down the Mississippi rail lines and around the Great Lakes, renting hotel parlors and church basements for weekend courses that promised to polish a bride's diction and teach her a fashionable vow for the modern home. The tuition was low because donors underwrote it, or so the handbills said. The real product was a voice on a wax cylinder, recorded under the pretense of practice, cataloged, sealed in tins, and used as collateral. If a family paid the school's pledge fee on time and kept quiet, the tin stayed sealed. If anyone resisted, letters appeared. We regret to inform you that the parlor demonstration record exists, and a transcript will be provided to your fiancé, employer, or pastor, unless the pledge is honored. No dirtier words than what a person had said into a horn. No picture. Only a private promise, turned into leverage by people who understood shame, etiquette, and the U.S. mail. Donovan took the pawn tin and the machine to the post office after closing and logged the serial numbers. The cylinder wore a shallow notch at the rim, like someone had pricked it with a sewing awl. The paper band around the tin carried a neat hand. Syllabus B, Lesson 3, the pledge. Inside the lid, a penciled code matched a rail car number. Paper, notch, code. She had 3 starting points and one question that mattered. Where does a school teach a vow that can be sold? The school's front was simple. A woman who called herself Madame Sorel rented parlors and hung a banner that said, "Domestic Eloquence Society." She spoke about poise and posture, then brought out a demonstration phonograph with a bright brass horn. An assistant, a quiet man with long fingers named Kellum, held up a blank brown cylinder and called it a rehearsal tablet. Ladies repeated lines while he guided their mouths toward the horn to catch consonants clean. The room felt harmless because nothing indecent happened. A chaperone sat by the door. The phrases sounded like good conduct. After class, each student was invited to cement progress by reading her practice oath once into a new cylinder. So the mind will keep the mark. Papers were signed. The school kept the record as a pledge, with a promise to destroy it when the donor fund matured. The donor fund never matured. Our subject did not walk into the parlor blind. Eliza Rowe worked above a dry goods store measuring hems, and she kept a mechanical mind inside a soft-speaking voice. Her fiancé, a freight checker named Caleb Hart, had a careful way with stamps and a habit of saying what the paper said even when he did not agree. Eliza's aunt, who did not trust anything that came in with a polished banner, read the handbill and told Eliza to skip the nonsense. Eliza went anyway, because her shop had begun to fill with girls chattering about finishing and modern vows, and she needed to know what was being sold in her name. Madame Sorel's parlor was a rented hotel room dressed like a classroom. A blackboard, chairs, a phonograph on a table with a mirror behind the brass horn, so each woman watched her mouth as she spoke. Sorel praised posture. Kellum adjusted stands and told jokes about consonants. Halfway through, the parlor door opened, and two women from the church auxiliary brought tea. One recognized Eliza and sat near the horn as if to bless the proceedings with respectability. Sorel ended with the model pledge, slow and clear, language that would not be out of place in a chapel if no one listened too closely to the control it demanded. Keep your body and letters pure. Keep no secret time. Swear to never meet nor be met in private without a witness. Eliza's aunt would have snorted at the phrasing. Eliza noted the cadence. It was made to sound proper and feel binding. Sorel invited volunteers to make a practice record to lock in the lesson. Eliza raised her hand, because if there was a trap, she would rather step first. She had prepared. Before class, she visited a machinist who turned new phonograph cylinders from blanks for the music hall. She told him she wanted to mark her rehearsal cylinder so she could find it later for a souvenir. He sold her a tiny triangular scribe, a jeweler's tool, and told her to nick the rim at the same place the stylus passes each turn. A mark too shallow would disappear under shavings. Too deep would ruin the cut. She practiced on a broken piece until her hand knew the pressure. Now, when Kellum held up a fresh brown cylinder and turned away to adjust the mandrel, Eliza set her nail at the rim and pressed a pin-prick notch at 12 o'clock. Not a gouge, a dot. The kind of thing a person remembers because she put it there. She read the pledge smoothly and did not stutter the name. Sorel clapped softly and told the room they would be amazed at how brave their own voices sounded when the cylinder played back for them privately at the end of the course. The school would keep the record as a pledge until graduation, at which point the donor fund would honor their commitment. Eliza took the receipt for her pledge fee, read the fine print, and felt her stomach go cold. The fee was called a donation. The cylinder was called a rehearsal token. The school reserved the right to destroy the token when the course concluded to the donor's satisfaction. Donors were not named. Caleb met Eliza at the end of the block, where trains coughed smoke into the night air. He had a paper in his pocket and a worry in his face. A letter had arrived at his boarding house that afternoon, addressed in a careful female hand. It was from the Domestic Eloquence Society, congratulating him on his fiancé's progress and reminding him of the pledge balance. It included a sentence about the rehearsal record and a line that said a transcript could be furnished to parties of interest if the fund requested verification. Caleb did not know what a transcript of a vow meant, but he knew when someone was describing paperwork as if it were a weapon. He told Eliza they would pay the balance to avoid embarrassment. Eliza told him no. She said embarrassment was the lever that made machines like this work. You do not oil it with money. Donovan entered through a different door. She traced the pawnbroker's serial numbers to a trunk of school supplies that had traveled by night baggage from a Chicago printer to a lakeside town and then back south. She found 2 more tins addressed to a freight office, not a parlor, marked exhibit cylinders. When she shook one, wax shavings whispered inside. Sign of copying. She spoke to a music hall mechanic who explained how a pantograph duplicator could make one voice into 10 with only a little loss of detail if the operator filed the shavings properly. He showed her a paper sack full of brown curls from a day's work. She realized the school did not keep one record for leverage. It made copies and sold transcripts. The numbers were the business. The threat was the advertisement. Kellum ran the back end. He was the kind of assistant who never looked like a partner until a ledger needed balancing. He rented express lockers near stations, moved tins in canvas satchels, and kept donor letters in a portfolio tied with pharmacy twine. He told himself they were stopping ruinous matchings and educating girls whose families would not or could not keep them from foolishness. He also liked paying cash for clean shirts. Eliza went to the second class with her aunt present as a chaperone. Sorrel introduced advanced diction for the household and let Kellum run the machine while she spoke about decorum. At the end, she made the quiet invitation again. Record the pledge to lock it in. Eliza declined. 2 others agreed. One, a girl from the ribbon counter, whispered that she already felt more dignified. The aunt stiffened when Sorrel said donors were generous to girls who took instruction seriously. Eliza noticed that Sorrel never named a donor. She named standards and outcomes. An outcome was something you could argue in public. A donor was a person who could be asked to testify. The letter to Caleb grew a cousin by morning. Eliza's employer at the shop received a note that praised Eliza's character work and suggested the donor fund would be most comfortable if her evenings were accounted for at the store rather than in private. The employer posted it on a nail in the back room and told Eliza's aunt that the shop was not in the business of hiding anyone. Eliza's aunt tore it down and put it in her bag. Eliza did not argue. She drew a map of names in her head: shop, school, express locker, boarding house. She saw how letters traveled before people did. She told Caleb not to write back to anyone. She told him to keep the envelope and the postmark. He wanted to fight a person. She wanted to fight a route. Donovan found the school's next parlor by watching time. The handbill said classes Saturday and Monday. The express locker recorded a pickup Sunday night. She asked the hotel desk for the room and received a polite refusal. She asked the fire marshal for the occupancy book and received a dry list of names. The society rented the parlor in the name of a church auxiliary. That is how they bought paper and credibility. By letting the auxiliary hang its banner in the corner for an hour and collecting a small donation for hymnals. Donovan visited the auxiliary room and found a velvet curtain rolled in a closet that smelled faintly of wax. A choir girl said the curtain had gone out and back twice in 2 weeks. Her fingers were sticky from touching the edge where someone had sealed it with red. The school's pitch was clever because it played on hunger that had nothing to do with food. Families wanted their daughters finished. Brides wanted to sound composed at the altar. Men wanted proof of something they had no right to demand. Everyone wanted to join a new century without stepping out of line. Sorrel offered modernity in a can, a voice that she called dignified, a vow that sounded legal, a donor who asked for nothing but a pledge. No one had to undress or perform anything obscene. They only had to speak clearly into a horn that made whatever they said feel permanent. Eliza did not wait to be cornered. She borrowed the shop's damaged phonograph from the winter display, the one with the cracked horn that still turned. She rolled a blank cylinder, pricked it with the same tiny notch as before, and read a second version of the pledge into it, adding a single wrong word in the middle that no one but she would hear. She hid the cylinder at the bottom of Sorrel's sample crate when Kellum turned away to change the mandrel. If that cylinder surfaced later as an exhibit, she would know the school had been looping old practice takes into new sales. Caleb's temper finally broke where so many tempers break, at a counter where someone patted the air and said, "We are only trying to help." He went to the parlor between sessions and demanded they return Eliza's rehearsal record. Kellum said the pledge was part of the course and would be destroyed upon graduation. Caleb said he would pay a fee to graduate now. Sorrel's smile turned from warm to hard in a breath. She said the donors required time to see reform stick. She said the school could provide a transcript to reassure him. He said he did not need reassurance. He needed the cylinder. Sorrel told him plainly that if he was so calm, he would not be here, and the school's mission was to make households calm. He left before he used words that would cost him his job. That night a third letter arrived, not to Caleb or the shop, but to Eliza's landlord. It said a transcript could be provided to the church if they wished to verify the content of a private pledge made in a public-spirited course. That phrasing did not happen by accident. It nudged everyone into thinking that the privacy had already been shared. The landlord knocked at Eliza's door and said she could stay as long as she liked, but asked whether the aunt might sit in the parlor downstairs for an evening or two. Eliza thanked him and closed the door and stared at the seam of light under the threshold. She was done reacting. Donovan set a trap without calling it one. She sent a plain card to the school offering a speaking slot for a domestic economy demonstration at the post office, where they were hosting public evenings on modern inventions. She wrote that the Federal Service wished to show how voice recordings aid families at mail-order weddings. It was bait painted as praise. Sorrel accepted at once and asked for a locked room to protect the lady's modesty. Donovan gave her the sorting room after hours. Locks work both ways. The demonstration drew 10 girls, 3 mothers, and a scatter of men who pretend to read the wall notices while listening. Sorrel spoke about poise and then brought out a better machine, nickel-plated and oiled. Kellum lined up 3 fresh cylinders. Donovan watched the way his hands hovered over the mandrel like a man making change. She signaled the postmaster with her chin. He turned the clock face to the wall and flipped the back latch on the door. Eliza stepped forward when Sorrel invited volunteers. She read the model pledge again, steady and clear. When the cylinder lifted off the mandrel, she asked Sorrel, in the level voice of a person who knows exactly how sharp she sounds, to show the class how a donor transcript is made from a rehearsal token. The room went still. Sorrel said donors did not request transcripts except to reassure anxious men. Donovan held up the pawn tin with the crack in the seal and the school's code in pencil under the lid. She asked if that was reassurance or business. Kellum closed the sample crate by habit. Caleb watched his hands and saw the corner of a paper ledger inside with initials and fees. 2 things happened then that showed everyone in the room what kind of school this was. First, a boy from the express office slid a canvas satchel through the back door and whispered that a night train would hold 5 minutes for a priority parcel. Second, a woman from the auxiliary came to the side and asked sweetly whether she should bring in the donors now that the rehearsal part was over. There were no donors. There were only men who liked the idea that someone else would enforce a promise they had no business demanding. Donovan took the satchel, set it on the table, and asked Eliza to open it. Inside lay 3 tins, 2 sealed, one with a hairline crack of red wax. Eliza held the cracked tin to the light and looked for a notch through the lid gap. She saw it, a pinprick at the rim of the brown cylinder. Her mark, her voice. Donovan did not raise her voice. She looked at Sorrel and Kellum and said 5 words that ended the demonstration and began the case. This is not a school. Donovan started with custody, not speeches. She logged the pawn tin, the serial number on the phonograph, the pencil code under the lid, and the envelope that had gone to Caleb's boarding house. She made 3 photo cards for the wall, 1 for paper, 1 for root, 1 for sound. On the paper card, she pinned a strip from the school's handbill that used the word donor 4 times without a name. On the root card, she pinned an express locker receipt from Sunday night and a baggage slip with a rail car number that matched the pawn tin's pencil code. On the sound card, she pinned a narrow strip of brown wax shavings the music hall mechanic gave her from his duplicator tray. If you want to prove a racket that lives in hints, you make it visible with parts that do not argue. Eliza did not wait to be coached. She brought the machinist's scribe and the cracked horn phonograph from the shop's window to the post office and asked if she could show Donovan something small that mattered. She set a cylinder on the mandrel, pointed to the rim, and explained how a notch at 12 o'clock would circle under the reproducer once per revolution. Not a gouge, a mark. She played the pawn cylinder long enough for Donovan to hear the cadence of the pledge and the whispered first name that followed it, then stopped and showed the notch. She said she had made the same mark on her rehearsal record, and a second decoy cylinder she had slipped into the school's sample crate. If either surfaced later as an exhibit or a transcript, the notch would prove the supply chain. Donovan asked why the school would copy practice takes at all. Eliza said a recorded vow is only useful if someone else can be made to hear it. Caleb brought the boarding house letter and the note to the shop. Donovan read both aloud and underlined the phrases that turned a lesson into leverage. Pledge balance, transcript of parties of interest, verification for fiancé, employer, or pastor. She told Caleb he did not have to like careful steps, but he had to follow them. He was to answer nothing, sign nothing, and keep every envelope for postmark and route. He asked how long he was supposed to stand there while people wrote around his life. She told him long enough to catch the person who writes the last line before money moves. Kellum handled the last line. He was the school's hands and its habit. He closed crates without looking. He kept the ledger with fees that were not called fees. He watched faces when the horn played back a voice for the first time, because the first playback told him everything he needed about who would pay quickly, who would pay late, and who would test the limits. To stay efficient, he rented an express locker near the station, the kind with a split key and a clerk who liked people to be on time. The locker held 3 things at all times: a stack of blank receipts with the auxiliary name, a canvas satchel for tins, and a cardboard tube for rolled donor letters. He told himself the school gave people a way to be orderly. He also told himself order costs money. Donovan needed a duplicator to tie sound to numbers. The music hall mechanic was proud of his pantograph. He set a master cylinder on one mandrel, a bank of slaves on the others, linked the carriages with a light metal frame, and turned a single crank. The stylus traced the master's groove and cut the copies in brown wax like a player piano punching a roll. The trick was the heating lamp and the sweep brush that collected shavings so they would not redeposit and blur consonants. Donovan measured the shavings and weighed them on a postal scale. The weight matched what you would expect if one voice became 5. She asked whether a notch at the rim would carry to the copies. He said only if someone recut the master with the notch present. If the notch was on the original take, every copy would have it. She wrote that down and circled it twice. Eliza and her aunt went back to class with a plan that looked like politeness. They sat near the horn. They let Sorrel run through posture and cadence. When Lesson 3, the pledge, came up again, Eliza declined to record. A girl from the ribbon counter volunteered. The aunt stayed seated at the door with her hands folded where everyone could see them. After the session, while Sorrel spoke to mothers about donations, Eliza asked Kellum if she could hear how practice sounds on the good machine. He played a sample cylinder from the crate. Eliza listened for her wrong word from the decoy she had planted. It was not there. Good. That meant the crate still held it. She asked to hold the rehearsal token for a second. He said policy forbade it. She smiled and stepped back. Policy was a word people used when they wanted power without argument. Donovan shifted from watching to touching. She asked the postmaster to let her stage a domestic economy demonstration in the sorting room after hours and invite the school to show how recording helps mail-order weddings. That gave her two things: the legal right to control the room and the practical right to control the clock. She hung canvas against one wall to hide the clerk windows. She taped a chain of custody card to the table and set 3 evidence tins in a row. She put the pawn tin in the center and the 2 newly intercepted exhibit tins to either side. She did not hide any of it. People tell cleaner lies when they can see the risk. Sorrel arrived 3 minutes early with a bright brass horn and a softer smile. She asked for privacy. Donovan said the room was already private and invited her to begin. Mothers and girls filled chairs. 2 auxiliary women took a front bench to certify propriety with their presence. Caleb stood in the back with his jaw set and his cap crushed in his hand. Eliza kept her eyes on the machine. Sorrel gave the talk that had sold so many evenings, a modern vow, confident diction, a demonstration that made the newest century feel civilized. She lifted a brown cylinder with 2 fingers and called it a rehearsal token. She placed it carefully as if it were fragile. It was fragile. That was the point. Kellum announced they would take practice readings. 2 girls went first. Eliza went third and read the pledge cleanly. When the mandrel stopped, she asked if students could take a token home to practice for their wedding day. Sorrel said the donors required safekeeping. Eliza asked who the donors were. Sorrel said it was uncouth to name benefactors. Donovan raised a hand like a member of the audience and asked how transcripts were made. Sorrel said transcripts were a courtesy for anxious men. Donovan asked if anxious men needed to be told a rehearsal exists. Sorrel said sometimes honesty calms people. The auxiliary women nodded, because honesty is a word that calms any room that does not look behind it. The express boy slipped a canvas satchel through the back door and whispered to Kellum that a night train would hold for 5 minutes. Donovan took the satchel, set it on the table, and logged it as delivered to a federal room. Kellum said it was private property. Donovan said it had entered a federal room. She opened it, pulled a tin with a hairline crack of red wax, and tilted it to the light. There was the notch at 12 o'clock on the cylinder inside. Eliza leaned in and saw her mark. Caleb saw Eliza's face and understood more in 1 second than all the letters had told him in a week. Sorrel tried the only move that works when you are cornered in a polite room. She called for composure. She said misunderstandings ruin reputations, and the school's mission was to protect reputations. Donovan laid the pawn tin beside the cracked tin and the exhibit tin and recited their codes and routes without heat. She asked Kellum whether he had used a pantograph duplicator that week. He said he demonstrated educational recordings. She asked the music hall mechanic to step forward and explain what pantographs do. He did simply. The room understood that one voice could become many. The mothers understood first because mothers are trained to notice when one mistake becomes a pattern. Caleb asked for his fiancé's cylinder. Sorrel said the pledge required time to mature. Caleb said he would pay any fee to mature it now. Donovan told him to wait. She asked Sorrel to name one donor. Sorrel named standards. She asked Kellum to produce a receipt for paper stock. He produced an auxiliary voucher with a blank line for hymnals and incidentals. The auxiliary women looked down. One of them found a smear of red wax on her glove from moving the velvet curtain earlier and started rubbing at it as if she could erase the day. Donovan turned to jurisdiction. She said the United States Mail protects private correspondence and forbids using it to convey threats of reputational harm for money. She said the school's letters did not use obscene words, and that was irrelevant. What mattered was the "or else" attached to a transcript that no one had agreed to create or share. She said she had two options: seize now and bring it to a hearing, or let the next bag run and catch the route higher up the line, where bigger names sit. She looked at Eliza. Eliza said, steady, that if they let one more bag run, 2 more girls would be trapped by morning. Donovan made the choice that keeps small towns from bleeding. She seized. She took custody of the 3 tins, the demonstration machine, and the satchel. She punched a tiny witness mark into the rim of the school's rubber stamp with a jeweler's tool so any replacement would show clean. She had the postmaster reverse the clock so the minute hand could not be argued later. She logged every hand that touched the table. She asked Sorrel to open the ledger in the crate. Sorrel hesitated. Kellum opened it. Inside were initials, dates, pledge balances, and a second column in pencil called CALM, with small sums next to families who had received letters. Calm was not a feeling. Calm was a price. The auxiliary women asked if the girls could go. Donovan said yes and thanked them for attending a federal demonstration. The room loosened the way it loosens after a sermon. Sorrel stayed composed but lost warmth. Kellum looked smaller once the satchel left his hand. Caleb looked at Eliza like someone had cut a line that had been pulling on his chest for a week. Eliza picked up the cracked tin and set it back down as if it were hot. She asked Donovan one question. "Can you make them give back what they took?" Donovan answered plainly. "We cannot give you back what you said. We can make sure no one else owns it." Donovan did not chase people. She chased routes. The school could swap names and banners in a week. Trains and timetables did not lie. She took the ledger Kellum had opened and copied only what mattered: locker number, baggage car codes, the 3-letter junction abbreviations where parcels changed hands. She had the postmaster pull the night schedules and drew a line from the hotel parlor to the express locker to a junction 2 towns south where baggage clerks like to move private parcels 5 minutes before the bell. She decided they would not wait for court day. They would take the train. Caleb signed on as a temporary porter for the evening run. He was a freight man by habit and a porter by necessity, and he knew the difference between looking like you belong and explaining why you do. Donovan gave him one instruction: do not touch a bag until a clerk logs it. If someone tries to push a satchel past the desk without a signature, you step back and say the book first. She gave the express boy a different job. Watch the back door of the locker room and whistle if anyone arrives with a crate labeled literature or hymnals, because that was how the school smuggled privacy into public spaces. She told Eliza and her aunt to go home and lock the window. Eliza said she was not going to disappear now. Donovan said she could help by staying visible in a place the school could not afford to touch, like the front pew of a church service tomorrow, with 10 eyes on her. Eliza said fine and left with the aunt, which freed Donovan to run the part Eliza could not see. Kellum arrived at the express locker with his canvas satchel 20 minutes before last pickup. He did not see Caleb at the far end of the corridor because Caleb was carrying 2 trunks for a traveling salesman and had mastered the art of being background. Kellum opened the locker, slid out a cardboard tube tied with pharmacy twine, and tucked it under his arm. He did not put anything back. That meant whatever was coming had already moved. He walked to the baggage counter and set the satchel on the scale. The clerk asked for a manifest. Kellum produced a church auxiliary voucher for educational materials and a coin scratched on one side. The clerk reached for the coin. Caleb cleared his throat loud enough to be heard. The clerk pulled his hand back and looked down at the book. No manifest, no move. Kellum smiled without his eyes and wrote down 3 words that meant nothing. Demonstration parts, samples. The clerk frowned. Donovan stepped in. She had a postal seizure order in her pocket and a rule about using it only when the room had seen the attempt to cheat the book. She asked the clerk for the last 4 entries from the school on that line. He slid the ledger forward. She matched the baggage codes to the pencil code under the pawn tin lid and the slip in Kellum's ledger. Then she asked Kellum to open the satchel. He said, "Private property." She said the book first, then the bag. He knew he had lost the point of entry. He opened the satchel. 3 tins lay inside, 2 sealed in red, 1 with a knife mark across the seam. The knife mark was fresh. Donovan tipped the cracked one toward the light. A brown cylinder sat inside with a pinprick at 12 o'clock. Eliza's mark. Kellum kept his face still. Donovan sealed the satchel with a federal tag and handed the clerk a receipt written in a clean, square hand. She told Kellum the satchel would travel, but with her, not with him. He stiffened, then adjusted his collar. She recognized the move. When people think they have lost the first game, they start the second one without asking permission. Sorrel did not come to the station. She sent a letter. It arrived at the post office 30 minutes after the train left, with Donovan aboard, and included a donation letterhead naming a new benefactor with a real name this time, a factory owner whose wife chaired 3 committees and liked being thanked in print. The letter said the society had always cooperated with federal demonstrations and regretted the inspector's misunderstanding. It hinted that if the matter could be resolved quietly, the donor list would remain untroubled. The postmaster logged the letter and sent a wire to Donovan at the first junction. Message from the parlor, donor named Tone, calm and important. Donovan read the wire by lamplight and filed the donor's name behind her eyes. A donor with a name was a door. The junction was a long platform with a telegraph cage and a smell of hot iron. Donovan stood where men who worked nights stood, where they could see the whole platform and be seen by no one who mattered. Caleb lifted trunks and watched the baggage clerk's hands. The express boy whistled once, not for show, just enough to move eyes. A man in a good coat with a choir pin on his lapel came down the platform with a valise and a bundle of cardboard tubes that looked like music rolls. He set the tubes beside the conductor and said they were church literature. The conductor nodded too fast. Donovan asked to see the literature. The man said the train would miss its mark. Donovan showed the federal seal. The conductor looked at the clock and then at her badge and picked the badge. They opened a tube. Inside was a brown cylinder wrapped in paper. The paper carried the school's code in pencil. The rim of the cylinder was smooth. No notch. Not Eliza's voice. Not a pawn cylinder. New stock, ready to be cut or delivered elsewhere. They opened a second tube. Same. The third tube rattled differently. Inside was a brown cylinder with a double line around the rim that looked like a manufacturer's error until the mechanic from the music hall, who had ridden down with Donovan, said, "No, that is a pantograph calibration ring. If you cut on top of a calibration ring, every copy carries a faint double halo on the first second of playback." He scratched a note on a card. Double halo proves duplication session. Donovan took the halo cylinder into custody and handed the choirman a receipt for his empty tube. He looked less like a church volunteer and more like what he was, a runner who liked a respectable pin. The train pushed south into the dark. Donovan spread her paperwork on an empty bench in the baggage car and traced a second line now, not just parlor to locker to junction, but parlor to locker to duplicator shop to junction. She needed the duplicator. The mechanic said the best pantograph in 200 miles sat in the back of a sheet music store at the River City terminus, owned by a man who tuned player pianos and sold hymnals cash. They would detrain there and walk in at first light. Kellum arrived by a different route. He took a buggy road that paralleled the rail and reached the River City before dawn with a valise, a ledger, and a letter addressed to the duplicator shop. He had one job left: clear the master cylinder rack before anyone with a badge could see it. Sorrel had told him the donors had reassured her. He believed her until he saw the federal stamp on the baggage clerk's book. He did not believe her then. He believed in speed. Eliza did exactly what Donovan asked. She sat on the front pew in the church where the auxiliary hung their banner. She kept her hands visible. She listened to a sermon about duty and heard nothing that would help her and everything that explained why the school worked. People would rather outsource fear than admit it. After the service, the auxiliary matron took her aside and asked if the society had embarrassed her. Eliza told her plainly that the society had turned a private practice into a product and used the auxiliary's name to buy paper. The matron said the auxiliary rented rooms to many good causes. Eliza asked if any of those causes left red wax on the velvet curtain and mailed transcripts to employers. The matron did not have a good answer. She did have a key to a closet full of ledgers and receipts. Sometimes you do not need a badge. You need someone who hates being lied to more than she fears losing a donor. River City morning. Doors not yet open. The sheet music store smelled like varnish and dust. The front room held songbooks and a wall of metal rolls for player pianos. The back room held the pantograph, one master mandrel, 8 slave mandrels, a light frame that linked the carriages, a swing arm with a heated knife to wipe shavings. The mechanic ran his hand over the frame like a farrier checking a hoof. He found brown curls in the tray and a scrap of paper with the school's code. He grunted and nodded toward a side cabinet. Donovan opened it and found 2 racks of brown cylinders, each with pencil marks, dates, initials, fees. In the third slot of the first rack sat a cylinder with a pinprick at 12 o'clock. Eliza's mark. The duplicator man came through the side door with a hot coffee and stopped when he saw the badge. He said the shop took all kinds of work. He said he copied sermons and language lessons. He said he did not know how customers used the copies. Donovan did not argue. She asked where the master rack was. He said he handed masters back to the customer. She asked him where he put them while he worked. He looked at the floor. Kellum walked in by the alley door with his valise like he owned the place. He stopped when he saw the mechanic and the inspector and the pantograph bathed in first light like a stage. He put the valise down slowly, as if slow would undo the last hour. Donovan asked him to open it. He did. Inside sat 6 brown cylinders and a narrow metal box with a screw lid. The box held a cutting stylus and a spare sapphire point. The cylinders wore faint double halos. She asked him for the ledger. He said his ledger belonged to the school. She said the ledger belonged to the case. He said donors would be unhappy. She said the United States did not answer to donors. He handed it over without looking at her. The mechanic lifted Eliza's notched cylinder with the care of someone lifting an eggshell. He set it on the master mandrel and spun the crank by hand. The groove caught and the horn whispered Eliza's voice at half speed, low and slow, but readable. He stopped before the whispered name because he had manners. Donovan pointed at the halo line on the first ring. The mechanic nodded. He set a slave cylinder and ran the frame without the horn. The stylus danced, the shavings curled, and the halo cut again into the copy. Proof in a sound you did not have to play. The donor's name from the wire appeared again at the door, not the man himself, but his man, with a statement written in careful language about misunderstanding and public service. He said the society had sought to elevate household speech and had stored training materials for safekeeping. He said any impression that records had been used to pressure families would cause pain to innocent ladies. He asked whether the federal office could dispose of this privately. Donovan said no. Then she did something similar to what she had done with Alger's stamp in the other case. She took the donor's statement, clipped it to the duplicator receipt, and had the shop owner sign both in front of the mechanic. The owner signed because he wanted to stay in business and because a signature in daylight felt safer than whispers at night. The donor's man blotted the ink and left with a face like someone who had been told the century had changed without asking him. Caleb stood by the door and kept count of cylinders into the evidence crate. Not old man counting, working man counting, touching each with a finger and saying the number under his breath. 12 masters, 24 copies, 3 empty slots with fresh dust rings. He asked what 3 were missing. The mechanic said they had been picked up at dawn. Donovan said where. He said the choir man took 2 and a man with a white collar took 1. The mechanic pointed his chin toward the river. The white-collar man chaired a committee on conduct and liked to emphasize syllables when he said purity. Donovan marked 2 addresses and a church office. The auxiliary matron arrived an hour later with a ledger under her shawl. She had walked hard and looked like someone who had made up her mind about a thing. She opened the ledger and showed room rentals, cash vouchers for paper, and a note pinned from Madame Sorel thanking the auxiliary for supporting modern elocution. The matron looked at the pantograph and the crate and the cylinders, and she did not faint or cry. She said one sentence that landed harder than the donor's letter. We were used to scare our own girls. She asked what would happen next. Donovan told her the records would go to a hearing, that names of subjects would be sealed, and that the auxiliary could sign a statement about how its room and vouchers had been used under false description. The matron signed, then asked for the velvet curtain back. She said she would cut it into cleaning rags. Kellum made one bad decision. He reached for the master rack when the mechanic turned to fetch string, the quick hand of a man who has saved himself by moving first his whole life. Caleb blocked his wrist without force, just enough to change the angle and leave the cylinder on the peg. Kellum's ledger slid off the table and fanned across the floor. Initials, dates, pledge balances, and a second pencil column called CALM, the same as the one in the crate, with small sums by families who had received letters. Donovan knelt and read 3 lines. The same donor fund that bought paper paid for postage and tips to clerks. That made the donor a financer of the route, not a name on a banner. That put him inside the line she had drawn, not above it. She wrote the charging document at the duplicator's counter. Not obscenity, extortion by post, conspiracy to defraud through counterfeit training materials, tampering with the custody of the United States mail, use of a church auxiliary to obtain paper for private leverage. She added a count for using duplicator apparatus to mass-produce threats. She signed, dated, and handed a copy to the shop owner, who looked like a man relieved to have someone else tell him where the ground was. That night, the train home carried an evidence crate, 3 tins, 1 valise, a ledger, and a rolled banner that no longer belonged to anyone. Donovan sat with her back to the window and her eyes on the door. Caleb slept sitting up with his cap over his face like a shield. The mechanic snored once and then stopped when the car jolted over a joint. The express boy guarded the crate as if it were his dog. Somewhere past the river bridge, a single envelope slid under the baggage door from the platform when the car halted for a minute. Donovan picked it up with 2 fingers and slid it with a key. Inside was a typed transcript of a pledge, clean and cold, with a header that said, "Courtesy to parties of interest." No name, no address. A product that could be dropped anywhere, a rumor needed help. She put it into the crate with the cylinders and wrote 1 more line at the bottom of the charge sheet. The school's lesson is to make a person pay to keep her own voice from becoming a weapon. Then she closed the crate and pressed her seal into the tape while the wheels hammered time. The judge refused to call it a morality hearing. He called it what it was, a mail matter with commercial consequences. The courthouse set a long table in a windowless room. Donovan laid out the evidence by route, not by scandal. On the left, the 3 tins. The pawn tin with the cracked seal, the station satchel tin with Eliza's notched cylinder, and the exhibit tin from the demonstration. In the center, the duplicator's crate with 12 masters, 24 copies, and the halo-marked cylinder. On the right, Kellum's ledger with the calm column, the auxiliary's rental book, the paper dealer's vouchers, and the donor's signed statement. She put the pantograph stylus and the spare sapphire point on a dish like surgical tools. She pinned a card over everything that read, "Chain of Custody," and she did not raise her voice. Sorrell arrived with a lawyer who had sold polite excuses for 20 years. She wore the same posture she used in parlors, chin level, eyes soft. Kellum came in behind her and did not look at the table. The donor sent his man again, this time with a letter on factory letterhead, calling the society a public service that had been misunderstood. Eliza sat with her aunt on the witness bench. Caleb stood along the wall with the express boy and the music hall mechanic. The auxiliary matron held her pen like a nail. The judge started with sound, not sentiment. Donovan set Eliza's notched master on a small phonograph, turned the crank by hand, and let the horn whisper 3 clean rings of the pledge in slow speed so jurors could hear consonants without turning the room into a theater. She stopped before the whispered name. Then the mechanic pointed to the faint double halo at the first ring and explained how a pantograph duplicates. He set a copy on the table, turned it through the first ring without a horn, and showed the halo again with a magnifier. The judge wrote down, "Halo proves duplication," and underlined it twice. Sorrell's lawyer tried to turn the halo into pedagogy. He said the society used recordings only to train diction and stored them to protect ladies from embarrassment until graduation. Donovan put the typed "courtesy to parties of interest" transcript next to the ledger's COM column and read 3 lines that paired a pledge balance, a mailed transcript, and a payment marked "COM achieved." She did not say extortion. She said sequence. The room understood. Kellum said the ledger used COM to mean peace of mind. The judge asked who received the money in the COM column. Kellum said the society disbursed stipends to chaperones and messengers. The express boy raised his hand and said no one had ever paid him to deliver anything. He delivered for wages at the counter, not for envelopes out the side door. The judge drew a box around COM and wrote to whom. Eliza went next. She explained the notch at 12 o'clock and the decoy cylinder with a wrong word she had planted in the school's crate. She showed the tiny scribe the machinist had sold her and the practice piece she had brought in her pocket to prove she knew what she was doing. She said she heard the wrong word on a copy in the duplicator rack, which meant the school was not just holding a rehearsal. It was repackaging it. Sorrell's lawyer asked if the wrong word could be coincidence. Eliza said coincidence does not buy paper with auxiliary vouchers, rent lockers, and ride trains under a hymn banner. Caleb read the letters aloud without commentary. The phrases landed harder when a man who had almost paid for silence had to say them in front of strangers. Pledge balance, transcript to parties of interest, verification for fiancé, employer, or pastor. The judge asked why he had not paid. Caleb said he would not pay to keep his fiancé's mouth from being used against her. He did not look heroic when he said it. He looked tired and correct. That mattered more. The auxiliary matron placed her rental book on the table and read the lines that put the society's crate in her closet and the velvet curtain back out with red wax on the edge. The donor's man shifted in his chair when she read the voucher for hymnals and incidentals. The judge asked if the auxiliary had received hymnals. The matron said they had received incidentals. She said the auxiliary's name had been borrowed to buy paper for private leverage. Then she said she wanted the curtain back to cut it into rags. It was not theater. It was maintenance. The donor's man tried the argument people in clean suits try when they feel the ground give way. He said the donor had funded elocution to uplift households and had no knowledge of any misuse. He asked whether the court would accept a sealed settlement and a public apology. The judge asked Donovan to place the donor's signed statement next to the duplicator receipt. 2 signatures, same day, same shop. Financing and manufacturing on 1 counter. The judge wrote inside the box he had drawn earlier, "Donor financed route." The lawyer turned to Latham's template from other towns and tested a new line. Nothing indecent was recorded, therefore the male statutes should not apply. Donovan stared at him a second too long, then replied that the statute did not require dirty words. It required the movement of something of value as a condition to suppress the release of a private record. A person's voice promising a private standard is something of value when used as a lever. The judge nodded and wrote voice equals instrument when leveraged. Kellum made the worst decision of the day at the smallest moment. He said the society destroyed masters upon graduation. Donovan slid the duplicator rack forward with 3 empty slots that carried fresh dust rings and asked why 3 masters had been picked up at dawn if graduation happened weeks from now. Kellum said exemplars were sometimes shared with pastors for guidance. The mechanic said pastors do not ask for the sapphire point when they come through the alley. The room turned toward Kellum in a way he had not experienced. He looked at Sorrell and found no help there. Sorrell took the stand and did what had always worked. She made herself the adult in a room of frightened children. She spoke about posture, diction, confidence. She said her program gave girls a way to speak without trembling. She said donors believed in dignity. She said any letters were courteous reminders. Donovan did not cross-examine with adjectives. She held up the pawn tin with the cracked seal, read the pencil code under the lid, matched it to the duplicator's receipt, and then placed Eliza's notched master beside the copy with the halo. She asked one question: what part of dignity requires a knife mark across a seal? The judge ruled on custody first. He ordered all cylinders seized under the mail statutes and any duplicates to be considered instruments of an offense. He ordered the society's mail privileges suspended pending indictment and barred it from using the auxiliary's room, vouchers, or banner. He ordered masters that contained subjects' voices sealed and labeled by initials only, and he barred any public release without court order. He wrote a separate line: subjects are not parties to be named. That mattered. It told everyone what the court considered private. Then he issued charges: not obscenity, extortion by post, conspiracy to defraud through counterfeit training materials, tampering with custody of the mail, use of a church auxiliary for procurement under false description, use of duplicator apparatus to mass-produce demands. He set bond. The deputy collected Sorrel and Kellum without ceremony. The donor's man asked whether his employer would be named. The judge said the grand jury could read the ledgers like anyone else. The hearing ended in pieces, the way real cases end. The auxiliary matron signed her statement, took the velvet curtain in both hands, and left. The mechanic carried the pantograph stylus away on a string like a charm and promised to refuse any job without a signed description. The paper dealer raised his price on gray stock and stopped taking cash. The express boy cleaned the locker counter with more pride than he had brought in. Caleb walked Eliza out the long way, so no one could say he rushed to protect her. He did not say thank you to Donovan because men like him do not know what to say when the person who saved them did it by touching clocks and forms instead of fences and fists. He tipped his cap to the room, which was enough. Donovan stayed to inventory. She wrote the numbers with the same square hand she had used on train orders: 12 masters, 24 copies, 3 empty slots noted, 1 halo cylinder flagged for demonstration, 1 pawn tin returned to custody, sealed anew, 1 ledger with calm column copied and filed. She placed Eliza's master in a separate tin with a tag that read, "Do not play." Eliza asked if she could have it. Donovan said not yet. She said the court would either order destruction or return after indictment. Eliza never asked for a copy. She wanted the right thing, not a souvenir. The last thing to come through the door was the consequence that matters most to machines. A letter from the railroad's legal office stating that any crate labeled hymnals would henceforth be opened in daylight. The judge initialed it and had it posted on the station wall. People like Sorrel survive on doors that look like charity and open like freight. This door closed. There was no curtain call. Sorrel's lawyer filed a statement for the papers calling the case an attack on benevolence. It ran under an advertisement for nickel horns and across from a notice about a lecture on good diction. No names appeared. The society's banner did not hang anywhere that week. The auxiliary's choir practiced without a curtain. The matron cut the velvet into squares. Eliza went back to the shop and made the window clean. The aunt put the pawn ticket in a drawer. Caleb carried crates without snapping at anyone and learned to leave a counter when a man tried to sell him calm. Donovan signed the evidence seals and sent the crate to New Orleans with a chain of custody tag that listed every hand. She kept one tin separate on a shelf in a room with a lock and a clock turned to the wall. On its label, she wrote one plain sentence that would read as dull to anyone who wanted drama and clear to anyone who wanted safety. Voice recovered. Leverage removed.